Production support for InFocus is provided by Smithville, a locally owned business serving central and southern Indiana since 1922 with residential and business internet, voice, and security services. Smithville, local pride, global technology. Information at smithville.net. Hoosier Energy, providing electricity for central and southern Indiana electric cooperatives and their member customers. Information at hepn.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
According to the Indiana Department of Workforce Development, since 2006, Monroe County has lost 7% of its manufacturing jobs, a number that is actually better than some other areas across the state. Bartholomew County is showing a 10% decline. Jackson County is down 23%. So what does the future hold for Hoosier manufacturers? The Obama administration is pushing for more environmental regulations and is providing incentives to companies who take that initiative. But is that going to help or hinder business? We'll discuss the state of Indiana's manufacturing industry and what it means to go green as we put clean manufacturing in focus. And thanks for joining us for this edition of In Focus. I'm Stan Jastrzebski. If you have questions for one of our studio experts during tonight's program, please email them to us at infocus@indiana.edu. You can also leave comments on our website, indianapublicmedia.org/infocus. Critics argue environmental regulations put a stranglehold on business, especially the manufacturing sector. Whether freedom from regulations or environmental responsibility leads to corporate prosperity is a debate often heard in Washington and across the nation. As WTIU's Alex Roy reports, some companies that are investing in going green are reaping the rewards.
Since Subaru of Indiana opened its production line floor in 1989, it's experienced an array of firsts. In 2003, it was the first auto assembly plant in the U.S. to be designated a backyard wildlife habitat by the National Wildlife Federation, and in 2004, it was the first U.S. auto assembly plant to achieve zero landfill status.
Zero landfill to us means we put absolutely nothing into a landfill. So if you put something into the trash this morning that ended up in the landfill, you put more into a landfill than we do as a company.
Easterday started working at the plant 2 months before it opened. He's now the vice president. He says Subaru has tried to create a company Lafayette residents will embrace. The 3 million square foot assembly plant pays nearly $5 million a year in property taxes and employs 3,800 people. 170 new jobs have been added just this year. Subaru provides incentives to its employees for thinking of ways to make the company more efficient. Easterday cites an example where an employee asked why styrofoam packaging material that Japan used to send engines in was being used once and then thrown away.
And we've saved as much as $1.6 million in a single year by returning packaging back to Japan for reuse.
Subaru reports it also only generates 1% of waste that must be incinerated under EPA regulations.
Anything sent to, for example, Cofanta in Indianapolis for incineration, we make sure that ash doesn't go into a landfill. We've got an agreement with them that it's used basically for road building materials.
But Easterday admits that exploring ways to go green can be time-consuming and can, in his case, take away from production.
Reducing and reusing are really the key to making it a profitable venture. And any company can do it. It's just a matter of focusing on it. And sure, there's some initial devotion of resources, so it's not going to make you money right away, but it will down the road, and certainly you can achieve profitability within a short period of time if done properly.
The question is, when is a manufacturer considered clean? When is a job considered green? This past September, using stimulus money from the Department of Labor, the Indiana Business Research Center conducted a survey of more than 13,000 firms, asking how many employees at each firm had what they considered to be a green job.
We were interested in benchmarking the number of green jobs in the state so that if we had subsequent surveys, we'd be able to say, oh, we've increased the number of green jobs in the Indiana economy.
The survey found there are nearly 47,000 green jobs in the state. That accounts for 1.7% of total employment in Indiana. Manufacturing jobs account for about 1/8 of the state's green jobs. Tim Slaper is the lead researcher on the Green Industry Jobs Survey. He says it's difficult to determine who within an organization has what's considered a green job. But let's go back to Subaru. Who has a green job here? The production line workers or upper management who make the decisions on efficiencies?
Now, if somebody says, wait a minute, we're making fuel-efficient cars here, and therefore anybody that touches this production process of this fuel-efficient car is green, then we have no way of saying that, no, those jobs aren't green, or yes, they are green. We're just going to count them as green.
Over time, Slaper says the survey will become more accurate. In this first iteration, one of the goals was simply to establish a definition for a green job, so the data will be more useful in the future. But for now, we know this much. The person recycling the plastic bag the engine was wrapped in probably does not have what is considered to be a green job. But the trend is growing. Easterday says as long as you concentrate on reducing, reusing, and recycling in that order, any business can enjoy cost savings and revenue generation, manufacturer or not. For WTIU News, I'm Alex Roy.
And my co-host this evening is Sarah Whitmire. Sarah, good evening. Tell us a little bit about who you're going to be talking to.
Thanks, Dan. Joining me in the studio tonight is Jim Barnes, and he's an environmental law professor at IU's Mallard School of Law, and he was also a deputy administrator for the EPA. So we'll have that discussion with Jim coming up in just a few minutes, but for now, back to you.
Okay, looking forward to that. Joining us tonight in the WTIU studios, our Cummins Vice President of Mid-Range Manufacturing, Stan Woszcznski, Indiana Department of Environmental Management Assistant Commissioner Rick Bossingham, and Purdue University School of Industrial Engineering Head Abhijit Deshmukh. Thanks for the three of you coming down today. I want to start out with something that you heard Alex talking about in the pre-pack, which is what is the definition of a green job? Stan, why don't we start with you and we'll go down the panel and get a quick definition from each of you of some things you think might be related to what a green job either looks like now or might look like in the future.
Sure. At Cummins, we take a real broad approach at looking at green or sustainability, right? And so we consider people who work on the product, making the product cleaner, part of that, people who help protect the environment in a variety of ways. And we also take a look at the work we do with our supply base and helping them to be green. So there are many functions that help us with our sustainability efforts.
Rick, does the state have an idea what a green job means to Indiana?
We're not particularly concerned about focusing on the green job sector. What is important to this administration are jobs, period. And that means we have Hoosiers who have access to health care, have access to shelter, and can afford to have a clean and healthy environment.
And Professor, is there a definition in an academic sense of what a green job is, or is that still sort of evolving?
It is evolving, but I would like to echo what Stan was saying about sustainability, and it really evolves to what do you really want out of the green effort. And if you look at the definition of sustainability, it has the three pillars: people, planet, and profit. And if you take all those three and you're trying to improve sustainability of a company or a product, that's really leading towards the green jobs, the green mission.
Rick, I wanted to start with you on this next question, and then we'll move on to the other two members of the panel. Something that Mitch Daniels said recently was he called the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, the Employment Prevention Administration, because he says that environmental concerns are getting in the way of creating jobs. We're too concerned about the environment and the earth, and we're not doing enough to, as you say, do what the state's priority is, which is create jobs. I mean, is that a fair criticism?
No, I don't think so. The nuance of that statement is we have existing laws and existing rules, but the key for government is to, and industry is quite happy to comply with those rules. But as a government, we need to make those permitting processes as quickly as possible to allow business to do what they need to do within the scope of those rules. We draw the rails around their behavior to provide a safe environment, but we need to do that in a way that allows them to move forward quickly on their investing.
Are these things, Stan, that Cummins runs into in terms of trying to create jobs? Because it seems like every couple of months there's an announcement, and we head over to Columbus to cover Cummins trying to create more jobs, and you're moving on to other manufacturing processes. But does the EPA and its administration of how you do your job and how you produce waste as a company get in the way of the things you might like to do, given a broad scope of your ability to do so?
As you mentioned, Cummins has a very strong presence when it comes to manufacturing in Indiana, and really many of the functions that support it. And we've always embraced regulations. And in fact, often been out in the forefront helping to lead the EPA to tougher standards for the environment, and mainly because we are a technical leader, and we believe that gives us a competitive edge.
How do you find a balance between the two, between trying to follow the rules and yet trying to be innovative?
Well, I think sometimes the rules can lead to the innovation, right? And in any case, whether we're trying to reduce a cost or reduce an emissions, those tough targets help people raise their creativity level.
All right, I want to get back to that discussion in just a minute, but right now we need to go over to Sarah Whitmire in the WFIU studios with her guest. Sarah?
Thanks, Stan. And I'm joined in the studio with Jim Barnes, and you used to be a deputy administrator for the EPA, so I really want to tap your experience with that agency first. And if you can just begin by just talking about why the EPA was founded.
Sure. Well, and I had the good fortune to be part of the group that set up EPA in 1970, along with a fellow by the name of Bill Ruckelshaus, who some folks in your audience may remember. He ran for the Senate here in 1968 against Birch Bayh. Was unsuccessful, but went to Washington and was tapped by President Nixon to be the first administrator of EPA. And EPA was set up at that point because the citizens as a whole were very concerned about what the condition was of our rivers and lakes that were not suitable to swim or eat the fish out of. Our national bird, the bald eagle, was having trouble surviving because of the presence of DDT in the environment, and its eggs were thinning and it couldn't give birth to its young. The air in Los Angeles and other places was kind of a national joke. I mean, because of how thick with pollution it was. So the agency was set up. Congress in the 1970s and 80s put in place comprehensive regulatory schemes for dealing with clean air, clean water, and with how we handle hazardous waste in the country. And typically then they ask EPA to establish standards for companies that were emitting pollutants into the environment. And typically these would involve either setting standards that would protect health, or they were going to be standards that required companies to simply put in place technology that was already available. In some cases, it pushed companies to do better than we were doing at this point. For example, Congress told the automobile industry that it wanted to reduce the emissions from cars by 90% from the levels they were in 1970. And actually that's a great success story in this country, and one that one of your guests that represents Cummins has had a big part of, because the cars that you and I drive today emit 98% fewer pollutants per mile driven than the cars did that I drove in 1970. So it's a real success story.
When you're talking about a place like Cummins, though, and how much success they've had, I can't help but think, how much do you really need buy-in from a company to make these sort of things successful?
Well, the federal standards serve to be kind of minimum standards, the things that you have to do if you want to get a permit and be able to discharge your waste products into the air or water. But the progressive companies like Cummins, like Subaru that you mentioned in your introduction, strive to go well beyond what those minimums are and make themselves more efficient. They want to reduce their environmental footprint. They want to make more efficient use of natural resources. And I think we're all the beneficiaries of that, because not only do we have a much more efficient company that can be more competitive in a worldwide competitive environment, but we also enjoy cleaner air, cleaner water, and less hazardous waste floating around than would be the case if they just sought to do the bare minimum they had to do, or whether they're putting pressure on the governor and other people to say, take these standards off, just let us dump our wastes out in the air or water without regard to what the negative effects of them are going to be.
Okay, I want to get back to this conversation, but for now we have to go back to Stan in the studio.
Thanks, Sarah. Rick, I wanted to give you a second to respond to what Jim Barnes was talking about in terms of his comment that, some might feel that the governor is saying, let's just do away with regulation and let's let people do what they say. You were telling me during the break that's not exactly what he's advocating.
No, not at all. Not at all. Again, there are set rules in place, and those are for us to affect and execute. But we need to be very fast, we need to be very clear, and we need to be very consistent about that. The other point I'd like to make, which goes behind the governor's discussion, is on a global competitiveness basis, right now EPA is planning on regulating greenhouse gases according to policy and not going through the legislative process. So that means you could have wild swings in that policy from administration to administration. Businesses invest billions of dollars in this country or have that potential. Until that matter is a matter of law instead of a matter of policy, they're going to be hesitant to invest in the United States.
We were talking just a couple of minutes ago about the possibility that being green in a business can actually be contributing to being a leader in a marketplace. Professor Deschmuck, let's talk about when you're talking to students or people who are about to go out and become entrepreneurs, is that a message you get out to them?
Absolutely, and one of the things we have been seeing among students of last few years is that they're very conscious about being green, being conscious about the environment, and wanting to be part of an organization that is taking a leadership position. So this is a key factor in getting the workforce that you need for your organization, the dedicated workforce that you would want. It becomes a competitive factor.
Do you find that students ask you similar questions about how do I balance following the rules versus making my company as profitable as I possibly can? Is this a concern that they have, or have they moved past it to believe that as you've heard Stan and Rick both say, you can in fact follow the rules and help them be a guide to being profitable?
Right. And the students, I don't think they see this as either or. They are looking at being innovative in order to achieve both the goals. So what do I need to do? How do I invent a new process? How do I invent a new material that gets me those things, instead of saying, well, I have something right now, and how do I minimize the cost for doing business? They're looking at new ways of meeting both the challenges.
One of the things I think the state is looking at doing right now is sort of repurposing some of its manufacturing industry. I talk with Greg Goodnight, the mayor of Kokomo, on a regular basis, and one of the things he and I have talked about in the last couple of years is taking some of the automotive factories which had been idled are now back up to mostly full capacity, but in some cases maybe the idea of even taking those factories and the workers who are employed by them and making them build wind turbines or solar cells or things like that is repurposing the manufacturing industry in the state of Indiana the way that some of these factories are going to go. Stan, why don't we start with you and we'll go down the line.
Sure. There clearly is a tremendous amount of manufacturing skill in Indiana. And I think those folks who have unfortunately lost positions, I think in the future will have some opportunities. We have plans to grow within Indiana, within Cummins, in the automotive world. And we also, tend to look at other aspects of energy too. And so I think there will be opportunity for people with the right skills.
Rick, are you seeing that the state is offering incentives to do this sort of repurposing so that you might increase the number of green jobs in Indiana?
Well, the state is offering incentives, certainly. We want to see the economy grow. But it's not our job to pick winners. That's for the free market to decide.
And what about from an academic standpoint? Are we talking about people looking at, you talked about building new processes. Does that include taking existing raw materials, existing factories, existing people who are going to put these things together and either teaching them new skills or teaching them to retrofit what they've got so that it builds something that is forward-looking?
Absolutely. So we could think about this in two pieces. One is looking at what new industries could come to the state. And what you mentioned about the mayor of Kokomo and what Kokomo has been looking at in terms of developing a healthcare medical devices industry. The same thing is going on at Warsaw, where they're leading the state and in the nation in prosthetic manufacturing. So healthcare manufacturing is a huge opportunity for the state, and it's something that is a growth industry in the future. Similarly, alternative energy, you look at wind farms making turbine blades or photovoltaic cells or electric batteries. This is something that's going to grow in the future, and that presents a huge opportunity for retraining the workforce and the employment for the future.
All right, we'll come back to this in just a minute. We need to head back over to Sarah Whitmire in the WFIU studios and her conversation with Jim Barnes. Sarah?
Thanks, Dan. And I want to basically just touch on the conversation they're having, which is about this issue of regulations and the role that it should have with companies. And there was an article in the New York Times that I was reading that asked, the lead sentence was, do environmental regulations kill jobs? So as one of the deputy directors of the EPA, I want to get your response to that.
Well, I think well-designed regulation should not kill jobs, but ought to serve as a spur to the development of better technology, more efficient ways of doing things. I think that at the same time, I think poorly designed regulations that don't give companies options and the freedom to try to figure out what's the best way to get to our environmental target could be problematic. So I would make a distinction there.
Now, does that get back to what you were saying before, just about the regulations the EPA sets, basically being the minimum?
Yes, that's true. I mean, the instructions that Congress has given the agency generally is to set minimum standards that the states have to put into permits and companies have to meet. And I think with all the talk about whether EPA is the bad guy in this picture, we need to keep in mind that most of these requirements we're talking about are things that were put in place by our Congress, most of them by overwhelming majorities in both houses of Congress. And they've then told EPA it's your job to implement these.
Now I'm wondering, is there, maybe you don't know, but is there this fear within the EPA that imposing too tough of restrictions or regulation can drive businesses to other countries with weaker regulations?
Well, I think that is always a concern, but then I think we have to understand what's the trade-off we may be talking about doing. Does it mean we may want to have more of our children have childhood asthma, or people come down with lung cancer from breathing various kinds of particulate matter, or have more of our fish that aren't going to be suitable for us to eat? Or is it better to set more ambitious, more protective standards, have the companies meet it, and hopefully that we have the socially responsible companies that say, I'm gonna meet those standards here, and if I do take my work to some other country, I'm gonna be as concerned about the citizens there and their health and well-being as I would like to be of my employees and the people in this country.
Sure. Okay. Jim, I appreciate you coming on the program. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but thank you. Back to you, Stan.
Thanks, Sarah. Stan, I wanted to give you a quick second to talk about something that you thought Jim Barnes might be talking about, which is the perception that perhaps here there are regulations, other countries there might not be. Cummins does a lot of overseas business, but it's not that way, you were saying, necessarily overseas.
No, that's right. Cummins does have operations on a global basis, and so if you've found a factory in Columbus, Indiana, you'd find one just like it in India or China. And all nations have environmental regulations, right? And all of them are actually pushing towards being more like the United States. So the playing field is definitely getting leveled from an environmental standpoint. And again, Cummins is in the lead of that. Our factories in, say, India are well lit, air conditioned, and just a great place to work. The governments tend to look to companies like Cummins to help lead the way for other companies to bring advanced products and advanced manufacturing to those countries.
Rick, you were saying earlier, it's not the state's job to pick winners, it's the free market's job. I noticed that a lot of the places we cover are doing things like passing wind ordinances. Tipton County, Howard County, Newton County, White County all have wind ordinances, for instance, and are all putting up or have existing wind turbine infrastructure to try to generate electricity. It seems clear that there are at least places in the state that have made this choice, that have decided this is what we're going for. Is it not then the state's responsibility to say, all right, you've made the choice in the free market to what you think makes sense for your business and makes sense for the environment, and now the state must back that decision now that it has been made?
Oh, certainly. The state wants to encourage not incentivize necessarily, but certainly encourage the development of greener technologies. But that occurs by the free market, by the innovations that companies like Subaru and Cummins make. We have a environmental stewardship program of which Cummins and both Subaru are part of, and these are companies who have a commitment and a history of environmental compliance, and also commit to do things above and beyond the requirements, things that we couldn't ordinarily require them to do. And so even at a company level, if a company wants to choose to do something above and beyond the requirements, that's fine. We're very glad to acknowledge that and to show them that we back them in that. And so we're very good to help, but the regulatory process, again, and let me step back here and say, IDIM just passed its 25th anniversary. EPA was created in 1970. The air, the land, the water in the state of Indiana are cleaner than they have been for the last 25 years, easily, by any measure. A couple of years ago, we met air quality standards for the first time since they were enacted in 1972, I believe. But there are still challenges ahead, and because the rules keep getting tighter, and we need to engage in great debate and about what those rules should be, and how clean is clean, how safe is clean.
A lot of these changes, it seems like, have been made on an incremental level within municipalities that are buying hybrid buses or that are passing these wind ordinances. It has been harder to make statewide change or to get the state to invest in things like high-speed rail to try to get transportation to be cleaner, things like that, and to create the jobs that sort of industry would go through. I'd like to get comments from the other two of you on the panel just quickly. Are the companies in the state that are doing green manufacturing sort of failing in terms of teaching lawmakers all that lawmakers need to know in order to move the state forward with what seems to be a worldwide trend? Professor Deschmick, why don't we start with you on that?
I don't know if they're failing to teach the lawmakers, but certainly this problem has to be looked at in a systemic level. So what people found when they were implementing lean manufacturing, for example, a few years ago, that you could shift the waste from outside the boundary you are looking at and claim victory, but really it didn't solve the bigger problem. And same things are repeating with the green revolution, as people are drawing a boundary and saying, my system or my town or my city is green, but then the rest of it gets shifted outside. So we really need to take a broader view, whether it's statewide or national or global, actually, to solve this problem.
All right, I apologize, but they're telling me we've run out of time. But my thanks to the three of you for being here today. It's been a great discussion. Thanks for helping us out. Thanks also to my co-host, Sarah Whitmire. Sarah, thanks.
Thank you, Stan.
Please do send us your questions for our next program. You can direct those to infocus@indiana.edu. You can leave comments or see portions of this show at indianapublicmedia.org/infocus. And thanks to all of you who watched and listened. Have a nice evening.
Production support for InFocus is provided by Smithville, a locally owned business serving central and southern Indiana since 1922, with residential and business internet, voice, and security services. Smithville, local pride, global technology. Information at smithville.net. Hoosier Energy, providing electricity for central and southern Indiana electric cooperatives and their member customers. Information at hepn.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you.